Live everywhere.
Daily Kos Radio on netrootsradio.com presents
David Walton. Kagro in the Morning Show. Now, here's David Waldman.
Hey, good morning, everybody. How you doing? It is Monday, March 6th, 2017. It's the beginning of week 7 of the Presidential Apprentice. Once again, back on the air with this nonsense. There's apparently nothing we can do about it. And no savior in our immediate future either. Another interesting weekend. Weekends tend to be hotter news cycles than they used to be. And I guess that has something to do with the dynamics of the new administration, such as it may be called. And I don't know. Do you want to start with the recap? I'm sure we'll catch up on things with Greg Dworkin when we hear from him in a few minutes, and he helps us kick off the week about with a review of what actually happened, news coverage-wise, over the weekend. Of course, I guess the big story. One, Donald Trump took off for another weekend at Mar-a-Lago, his 4th out of the 6 weekends he has spent in the presidency. And I did see, I think maybe it was Judd Legum documenting things nicely, probably about the end of last week, pointing out that his weekends have pretty much been inauguration and all the parties, and then Mar-a-Lago, out to the Trump D.C. hotel for a burnt-to-a-crisp steak at his hotel restaurant, Mar-a-Lago. That's kind of what he does with it. And the two things are in the news again today as well. The emoluments clause being flouted with regularity, and he's upping his game on that score as well. But the big scoop, that's not a scoop. I mean, it's not like I'm the only one that knows about it. That's the whole problem. The big story of the weekend, Trump left the White House in a huff on Friday over God only knows what. I think it was largely, one, the ballooning Russia story. I think the thing that actually set him off with anger was the Sessions recusal over the Russia story. He had just spent the day telling everybody that he didn't think that Sessions should recuse himself, and then Sessions did recuse himself. And I could see why a president might actually be angry about being countermanded in that way, except that probably the recusal was the right thing to do, and Trump wanted him to do the wrong thing, and he can't believe somebody didn't listen to him. But this is one of the lessons he'll have to learn about how it's different running a government. Well, he's not running one, but he's supposed to be running a government versus running a business, which he also didn't do. So I guess there's really no way for him to learn this lesson at all, and the show is over. Thank you very much for listening. I know there's going to be something else here. Bill in Portland, Maine thinks we got 2 hours on tap. I don't know. Do you think we ought to go that long? Daily Kos Radio is live now, as he warns you in his morning tweet. Kagro X, that is me. I'm David Waldman. I host the show. I rarely tell you my name. I let I let Greg do it. I let the announcements do it at the beginning and the end of the show. I occasionally read Bill's tweets and then remind you, oh yeah, I'm Kagro X. But hi, how you doing? David Waldman, that's my real name. I tweet as Kagro X, my old silly blog name. It's shorter than David Waldman, and David Waldman was already taken on Twitter. He seems to be a nice guy. He, too, from New Jersey, by the way, and a non-practicing attorney. I found out as somebody misdirected a piece of Twitter mail to both my actual Twitter address and at David Waldman, and he seems to. I've read about him because sometimes I search to find my own articles on Google, and I find stories about him. He's a non-practicing attorney. It's not me. He is I believe he opened a coffee joint and is a coffee roaster now. So you can't beat that. Get your good. I'm sure everyone should go to New Jersey, or if you're already there, get your coffee from not me, David Waldman. There's also, there's all kinds of David Waldmans. There's a developer in Connecticut. I don't know if Greg knows that guy. There is a concert violinist from Colorado who's also a child molester. How's that? You always want that on your search too. That was a great story. That also not me. I do not play the violin. for one thing. Child molestation, also not on my agenda. These are things I don't do. They're not life goals, nothing. It'd be nice to play the violin. It'd be terrible to be a child molester. I'm going to leave that one out. What are we going to do today? Kagro X, David Waldman, promises 2 hours of finely tuned machinery. You can hear the first couple minutes of it here. Believe it. Well, why not? You might as well. How do we sum up the weekend? So, Trump takes off in a huff. He's mad at Sessions for recusing himself. He left his advisors behind. He actually, I understand, he took them off the Air Force One manifest. And this does bring up an interesting point. So he took off for Florida for the weekend. He took Ivanka with him, of course, family. But that also means that he's not going to tell Kushner, her husband, that he can't come on the plane. That's going to cause some real tension. He leaves Bannon and Priebus and Miller behind. They eventually made it down to Florida. They had to go down there to meet with him, but he wouldn't let them go with them on Air Force One. That's a big slap in the face to them. But he took Kushner. But did he take Kushner because I still trust that guy, but not you? Or did he take him because I can't make Ivanka mad, or what? I don't know why. We put a little gruffness in his voice. I made him sound tough and leaderly, so we'll stop doing that. So down he goes to Florida. Sessions also was summoned down to Florida. He couldn't yell at him back here or wait for Monday to yell at him about recusing himself back here at no cost to the government. So we hauled his stupid ass down to Florida, too. They all mingle. I understand the White House counsel, McGahn, was also down there. That's really something you don't want to do if he is, in fact, looking into the Russia story himself. You don't really want to have him at dinner with the recused attorney general. But what do these guys know from ethics, right? They're going to violate all the rules. So down he goes to Florida. The thing that I guess had him pissed off, and the thing that really set him off on Twitter was, of course, he starts rolling out these allegations that that Obama, while still president, was secretly, and he insinuates illegally, wiretapping, and he used that phrase, wiretapping. I know sometimes we use it as an offhand shortcut for surveillance. He said it was wiretapping Trump Tower, and no telling what he even thinks that's supposed to mean. By the end of the day, by the end of the hour, really, we all found out, no, he wasn't reading off of any credible reports or even newspaper accounts of credible reports. Breitbart had generated this one. It was off of an old rumor, and I think it was probably calculated to make everybody believe that the president believed that that his campaign had been surveilled. So a million directions you could go if you wanted to investigate what all of this really means. Apparently, the White House counsel spent his Friday and Saturday trying to chase down whether or not there were any FISA warrants for the surveillance of, I guess, the campaign headquarters, which again is why you would not want the guy who's looking for the Russia warrants at dinner with the recused attorney general who's not supposed to be touching the Russia story. But look, the guy eats his steaks well done. Everything's out the window in terms of norms. So why not violate all the rules and regulations of ethics and firewalls and whatnot? So it was a hell of a weekend, and by the end of it, by the Sunday round of the Sunday shows, everybody was on the president's back again about making up stories, lying, and possibly being untrustworthy in every aspect of the job. And that could lead us to some problems. We'll talk about some of those. But first, we'll talk with Greg Dworkin. Good morning, Greg.
Hey, good morning. How are you?
I'm okay. I'm better than the concert violinist in Colorado, I can tell you that.
This is true. You know, the only way to approach all of this, I think, is really to go back to basics. And by basics, I mean Groucho Marx.
Okay.
I mean, you know, if you're going to leave Washington in a huff, maybe better you should leave in a minute and a huff.
Okay.
If you're going to, you know, think about what's going on here, let me give you some Groucho quotes because they just summarize it perfectly. He said, politics is the art of looking for trouble, finding it everywhere, diagnosing it incorrectly, and applying the wrong remedies.
So far, so good, then.
Right? He said the secret of life is honesty and fair dealing, and if you can fake that, you got it made.
No problem. Although he's having a difficult time.
Yes, he said, Groucho did, learn from the mistakes of others. You can't live long enough to make them all yourself.
Well, yes.
Right? You know what else he said?
What
He said,
else?
when you're in jail, a good friend will be trying to bail you out, but your best friend will be in the cell next to you saying, damn, that was fun.
You might as well.
You know, I mean, he's just got all of this right. So Trump gets his family, the guys who are going to go to jail with him, and maybe he excludes some of the others, maybe not. It's not clear why he left Priebus and Bannon behind. It might have been to work on the executive order that's supposed to come out today. Might have been some other reason.
Yeah, it could be.
But you never know. And so, yeah, he was mad. And the thing is, the guy is completely unqualified. He plays a president on TV but doesn't know what it means to be one. And every time he actually tries to do something, it fails. So
Yes.
what happened over the weekend, I think, is far more important than just another tweet storm. You know that I have been on your case, and everybody's about this for weeks. But we do have these shared values and norms that you can't go around breaking. And he did that over the weekend
He did.
by accusing
Tap
Obama
wrong.
of somehow or other tapping his phones and being responsible for all sorts of stuff. I sent you a picture. I don't know if you have a chance to see it. It's about midway down, right above the polling chart.
Okay.
Somebody made it. I don't know who, but it's Trump Tower. Trump standing in Trump Tower, maybe in the lobby, maybe in his bedroom. That could be his bathroom. You can't tell. It's all,
All looks the same.
Louis gold gilt and stuff. But there's Obama outside the window with some binoculars and using one of those suction cups to attach himself to the window so he could see what's going on. And it's hysterical, but, that's basically what Trump was accusing Obama of doing.
Yeah, peeking in the window. Yeah, okay. So he's climbed up the tower to the top with those suction cups on the windows.
Yeah,
on
it's
the
pretty
outside.
hysterical.
All right, and one-handed too. So
One-handed, right?
Wow.
So this is a piece from Karen Tumulty from the Washington Post, just to put this in perspective here.
Tumult. Yes.
Almost chaos, right? Trump's charge that he was wiretapped takes presidency into new territory. That's the title.
Yes.
And it says...
Not nude territory, Donald.
Yeah, Donald Trump's presidency has veered onto a road with no center lines and no guardrails. The president's accusation Saturday that his predecessor, Barack Obama, had tapped his phone during the very sacred election process escalated on Sunday into the White House's call for a congressional investigation of that evidence-free claim. The audacious tactic was a familiar one to Trump, who had little regard for norms and conventions. When he wants to change a subject, he often does it by touching a match to the dry tinder of sketchy conspiracy theory, but the stakes have gotten higher, and the consequence is more real and serious as questions mount over Moscow's reported attempts to interfere with last year's presidential election. So in other words, all of the information out there, including James Comey's huge story in the New York Times, that Comey asked the Justice Department, led by Jeff Sessions, to repudiate Trump's claim and say it simply didn't happen and it wasn't true. Obviously, Sessions wouldn't do it, so Comey went public with it. And that's the second time Comey has put himself into an extraordinary situation. The first time when he came out before the election, right before the election, and re-litigated the Clinton email, which was horrible. It was horrible that he did in the first place as well. He should have just said no charges and shut up and went away. He did not. But this time he's actually challenging the President of the United States and basically saying in public, you're a liar.
Oh. Yeah.
It's pretty big stuff.
It is. It is pretty big stuff. It's rather, well, it leads to another big story and big implications. And I mused about it a little bit over the weekend. We'll try and round that up a little bit later on. But I did see Tegan Goddard sort of putting it out there this morning, too. You got to start thinking about what happens if you can't. I mean, if the president is a liar, and as other people said, presidents spin, dissemble. Sometimes they actually lie, but it's never really reached the stage where the president just habitually and purposefully said things that had huge implications that he knew weren't true, but just said, let everybody else sort it out anyway.
But the thing is, it's been true since January 20th, and what's happening is that this violation of norms is so egregious that even the reporters see it. So this is from that Tumulty piece that I was reading to you. And what Trump said is terrible. Just found out that Obama had my wires tapped in Trump Tower just before the victory. Nothing found. This is McCarthyism, Trump fired out in the first of 4 tweets. and was reminiscent of the early days of his political ascendancy when he built a political base by pandering to the fringes with false stories about Obama's birthplace. But the thing is, as Tumulty says, the voice of a U.S. commander-in-chief carries much greater weight than that of just about anyone else on the planet. And Trump's detractors say the way he uses that platform has worrisome implications that go far beyond the sensation he creates on social media and his ability to dominate the news because reporters are just jerks, really, when it comes to him. And here's the quote. This is the money quote from Peter Wenner, exactly what you were saying. We have, as president, a man who is erratic, vindictive, volatile, obsessive, a chronic liar, and prone to believe in conspiracy theories. And you can count on the fact that there will be more to come, since when people like Donald Trump gain power, they become less and not more restrained.
Yes.
Nor does Trump, as you were pointing out with the Mar-a-Lago thing going down and leaving people behind, the grown-ups weren't on the plane, nor does Trump appear to have a governing apparatus around him that can temper and channel his impulses. So this whole illusion in that sentence is that in Washington, everybody around the president is supposed to act as if the president is nuts, then therefore we, the rest of us, can run the place as if there really were a president. And that's what matters, and that's what we expect. It happened with Reagan when Reagan had Alzheimer's, and why isn't it happening here?
Yes.
I mean, that's the whole implication of everything.
Well, it's a good question, a good point. I mean, we've I guess if you compare it to the Reagan situation, you can say, look, we've had a situation where the president was essentially incompetent to the task, and we dealt with it. Of course, it wasn't the case from day one. That's a problem. And two, I almost had to stop you there where you say so the president jets off to Florida and leaves the adults behind. The problem is that the adults that usually go with them are themselves problem children and not, in fact, adults at all. There's nothing like the apparatus surrounding Trump that we had surrounding Reagan, and I hated them.
There's no James Baker. There's no grown-ups. So Trump comes in, and Trump allies, again, in this story here, are basically talking about the fact that we are right and good and everybody, Democratic and liberal, is horrible. And the problem with the deep state, they keep referring to that, is that it's all Democrats, and Democrats are against us, and the bureaucracy is against us. So the very apparatus, in other words, that are attempting to rein him in and make sure things work in a functional manner, he is attacking because he wants to do something completely different, which is be a 10-year-old.
Yes. They love the deep state thing here, and they've turned it into something sort of uniquely their own in terms of their
paranoia.
Their fantasies about it. But I think it's another one of those things that Bannon read about half of somewhere and decided to spin it into his own thing, and it sounds better than I don't know what I'm doing. Essentially, it's everything's going wrong. Why is it? Because you're screwing everything up and you don't know what you're doing? No, it's because of deep state.
But think of the aspects of what we just talked about here and what this article is about. On the one hand, it acknowledges that he's completely incompetent and not able to do the job. On the second hand, it suggests that the way things work in Washington is that everybody is supposed to ignore that and, for the good of something, work as if their job is to prevent this from being known and just make sure that the system works anyway. And then third is that reporters will, more likely than not, comment on the second but never the first. And all of those conventions have been thrown out the window because Trump keeps tweeting on weekends.
Yes, that's the big problem, really. Reporters have to work on the weekends, and they resent it.
They get mad. But, it's just the whole idea that somehow or other it's okay for the president to be completely incompetent. We just need to talk about how the rest of the system fixes it. That's really the key. No, it's not. The key is that the president was completely unqualified for the job in the first place, and this is something you should have been talking about for like a year and did not.
Mm-hmm.
So it's very aggravating for Comey to then bring all this stuff up and throw it in Trump's face in a way that can't be ignored and has accelerated it to the point where even the reporters can't ignore it. It's really rather remarkable, and that's what happened this weekend. And I don't think there's going back from that. I mean, that's a threshold that was crossed.
Yeah, I don't see how you pull back from it. But, let's try.
Let's try. Let's look at it from a conservative point of view. Always fun. It's a good thought experiment. You don't have to agree with it. But this is Jay Cost talking about the real problems about intelligence leaks and their timing and intent. And again, it gets back to the norms by which we tend to think that Washington is governed. So I thought it was interesting. Jay says he works for Weekly Standard. He's a never-Trumper. I should put that out there in the beginning. And that remains a never-Trumper to this day. No quarter given.
Okay.
It's been pretty clear for months that the government has been spying on the Trump orbit, right? And it's been pretty clear that the timing of the leaks of these intelligence gathering efforts have been politically motivated, right? It's not a coincidence that some big stories came right before the inaugural and right after his pseudo State of the Union, right? I mean, go back and read the stuff from January. The NSA is explicitly mentioned as part of a counterintelligence operation. The problem with Trump's tweets is he fingered Obama. But that's not been established. What we have established is that multiple parts of the Obama administration were gathering intel on Trump associates. Let me just interject here. And that may well have nothing to do with Trump associates, but who they were talking to. If Trump associates had not been talking to Russian foreign nationals, then maybe no. So in the routine surveillance of foreign nationals, you might have picked up Trump associates, which is not the same thing as concentrating on Trump associates. I just say that for the record.
Okay. You say that, or did Jay Cost say that?
I say that for the record.
Okay. Well, you're right. And so would JB if he said it.
Jay says that's not even an inference. It's just been outright established in these reports. The inference, and I think it's a reasonable one, is that the dispersion of this information has been political in nature. Trump claimed the collection of info was political in nature. That's not been established. But the dispersion of the information is. That's what he's saying. And I'm extremely bothered by the dispersion of this info for what seems to me to be political purposes. And that bothers me as much as any intemperate tweet by a bad POTUS. Bad POTUSes can be voted out of office. You know, I don't want to take 4 years to live with this guy, so sorry, Jay. Unelected bureaucrats leaking partial info to unelected journalists because they all dislike the elected POTUS. I don't like that. Okay, Jay, where were you when Comey did it?
Yeah.
Jay Koss says, I agree with this, and I think it points to a big reason why the bureaucracy keeps getting away with this crap, and what he's referring to is a tweet that says it's dangerous, and the same basic thing that Comey did to Clinton by editorializing her actions. So he's agreeing that Comey was bad. And when I was online with him, he agreed with that as well, so that's where he's coming from. And, of course, journalists who typically claim the mantle of good governance don't mind it either. It helps them. There's never a durable coalition to step forward and say, hey, bureaucrats, quit breaking the law to interfere in politics. And there's no institutional counterweight because the reporters won't help. And since 9/11, the intelligence community has gotten really aggressive in dabbling in the political reign. If they have solid links of collusion, they should pursue criminal prosecution. I'm not defending Trumpian bombast here. I see no indication intel collection was politically motivated. What I'm saying is that the dispersion of the information, he's talking about the leaks, has seemed awfully convenient in its timing, and that stinks of politics. And by the way, that doesn't figure Obama at all. Could just be bureaucrats in the intel service who hate Trump. Personally, I don't buy the idea, he says, that an administration too incompetent to build a website could secretly take down the next POTUS. He's referring to Obama. That seems silly to me. And by the way, it's a lot more discomforting to think this is career bureaucrats acting on their own volition, because what's the remedy for that? It's like Democrats blaming Comey. Comforting to finger one guy who we know, but come on. It's a bunch of paper cuts from pissed-off FBI agents who shall always and forevermore remain anonymous, and Jay's point is they ought to be condemned just as much as Comey. And he says, considering the power that somebody like Mark Felt wielded over the course of the politics for a whole decade, we all hoped it would be like Kissinger or somebody, instead of some bureaucrat you never heard of.
Yeah.
And I said to him, well, I'm still grateful for it. And Koss said, yeah, me too. Mm-hmm. Given that Nixon was so clearly out of control. But what if it's not as black as white? Not as black and white? Then it's unsettling.
Yes, well, welcome, United States.
Yeah, pretty much. So I think these are good points that he brought up. And again, speaking as a never-Trumper, it's not great that you have all these leaks from the intelligence community, but then you have to go back and say, well, why did that happen? And there's a couple of obvious root cause reasons. One is that people like Nunes and Richard Burr on the Senate side and Chaffetz and other people in Congress who are committee heads who are tasked with fixing this and monitoring this aren't doing their job. That's one reason. Mm-hmm. And another reason is Donald Trump himself and the use of whatever information he has in a completely partisan political manner constantly to the point of lying about it, which has to be counted in some way, shape, or form. And so sometimes the only thing that's left to do that, and the media going along with these, he's president, so you have to, respect the office and do it that way. Did we talk about the Jeet here tweet storm on that? About reporters just, feeling like they have to honor the presidency itself, and they just can't get their heads out of the idea that they themselves are sort of courtiers.
The courtiers mention came up, although I don't know if we went through the whole tweet storm or whether it's just something he said before.
Well, it's a short one, so
okay.
and he wrote a story about it, but I actually like the tweet storm better.
Let's see.
So let's do that. I historified it, so I know I put it aside here.
All right,
and it's about the structural relationship between media and the White House.
Okay.
And it's relevant for this discussion.
Okay. Well, we could always repeat it, especially if it's short.
Yep. So there it is at the bottom.
Okay.
Why did Trump's address to Congress receive such over-the-top gushing praise from pundits? Well, Trump's specific reasons saw bigotry, low expectations, like, he could read, and desire for false balance. And also, maybe Rocky start as president, they want to be fair.
Right.
But Jeet says the deeper reason for Trump getting these plaudits is structural. The American presidency is monarchical. And the American Constitution, closely modeled on the British system, put the president in the same position as king, embodiment of the nation. And if the president is a king, then the Washington press corps are courtiers. Their job is to attend on the king's words. And like courtiers, many pundits live and die by access to the monarch. They live on gossip. They live on hunger for his nod of approval. So these pundits right now are courtiers in search of a king and gratitude for any sign of presidential behavior by Trump. And that's what he's saying. Now, he says one good thing that could come out of this is it could destroy forever the monarchical mystique of the presidency. I think that's foolish. It didn't happen with Nixon when Nixon went down. Those of us who are old enough to remember Nixon's imperial presidency. So these things come in cycle. They're never destroyed. But interesting point about the reaction of the media. And so the media reaction to Trump is generally the way he describes. And just look at Chris Eliza and the Village, people in terms of that. But this picking on Obama violated such a huge norm because you're supposed to take that attitude to all presidents. And the fact that Trump violated that norm almost gave them license to go and say this is not normal and therefore Trump is not normal, which is something that they have so far incredibly avoided saying, and yet it's so obvious it's all part of the big deal.
Very true. I mean, although, I guess somebody has avoided saying that Trump's not normal. I just don't know any of them.
Yeah.
It's hard for me to tell them apart in my tweet stream. Is that, was it a journalist? Did a journalist say that? I don't know.
What they say on Twitter is quite different than what they say in print.
That is true, too.
The Twitter is for us to talk to each other. Print is for everybody to see. And, the amount of reach that cable gets, of course, is huge. So you have to see it on cable all the time. Now, there's some interesting things that are happening, speaking about cable. And one of the interesting things is a poll that came out this morning from CNN. And the reason that it's interesting is because it's a CNN poll and therefore likely to be repeated on CNN all day today because it's their poll and they tend to do that. And it asks the question, which comes closer to your view of the investigation into contacts between Russians and Trump campaign associates? An independent special prosecutor should be appointed to handle the investigation, or Congress is capable of handling it itself. Ask all people. 65% of the public says special prosecutor. 43% of Republicans, which is a pretty big number. 67% of independents and 82% of Democrats. So the public says special prosecutor, and that is only going to increase the pressure, especially after this weekend, of actually doing something about that. Richard Blumenthal, my senator, says that you can't have any more confirmations at Justice with Sessions recusing himself until you get that special prosecutor because he's going to slow walk it. How well that can happen, I don't know. This is something you were tweeting about over the weekend, I saw, in terms of if you decide to take every single step to block and slow down every single thing, and we talked about this last week, how effective can you be and will it work?
It won't work forever. And depending on
change the rules?
how well, either that or they don't really need to change any rules in order to get under normal or near normal circumstances to get the rest of the Justice Department installed, even against unanimous Democratic opposition. Of course, you can't filibuster those nominations any longer. And they've become very well practiced at making them take 30-plus hours per nomination. But even with that, and even with Trump's end-of-the-week complaints that Democrats in Congress are pathetic because they haven't even approved his cabinet, even though he tweeted that after every nominee everyone he's actually nominated for the cabinet has been approved so far. Anybody who's made it to a vote, anyway. He can try and slow these things down, but I guess there's more to be done. And so we're into the next phase of things where we'll have to describe to them exactly what other options are available to them. Luckily, Trump has played right into a number of these proposed tactics. Essentially, we're now at the point where Trump lies so much, he misleads so much, he pulls things, from out of nowhere so often that we're really at the stage where we cannot be sure any longer. It used to be that this would be crazy to bring this up. If I had suggested this tactic for any other Republican president, they would have, well, they haven't thrown me out of the room yet, but they may still. But they would look at you like you were crazy. If you said, today we're supposed to be meeting to consider the nomination of a deputy attorney general and an assistant attorney general. That is, in fact, what's on the agenda tomorrow at the Judiciary Committee, and this is what Blumenthal's talking about.
Yep.
I get into the room. If I'm there as a senator, I walk in, the meeting's called to order, Grassley says what we're there to do, we've got these 2 nominations pending, and I'd say, just a point of order, I have a question for you, Mr. Chairman. To quote a top aide to the president, says who? You say we're here to consider the nomination for Deputy Attorney General. I don't know who that person would be. You have before you a piece of paper which purports to convey the nomination from the White House to the Senate. Are you sure? Because I literally am not sure that paper actually says that the president signed it, that he was in his right mind when he did, and that's an official document, and I really think we're going to have to go through every single step. I want to verify that that's really a communication from the president. I want to have a vote on whether or not we ought to accept it from the president. I want from now on, honestly, if you really pushed it, every single thing that we used to assume as a matter of course, because that's the only way you can make the government work, is out the window. It right. Seems really dumb because it's like, well, of course he nominated that person. You know what? I don't know that.
Prove it.
I don't know. Really, honestly. Tell me that, and people laugh, and I say, well, let me ask you this. You say that's crazy. Would it have been crazy a month ago to say that one of the president's top advisors would secretly and by surprise slip himself into an executive order naming himself to the Principals Committee of the National Security Council? Because that happened. And Trump said, I didn't know that. He's not reading them. Presidents generally don't because there's a trust factor.
Right.
And they know, and this is what I asked for, and you will prepare that. And we're at the point where he can ask for something to be prepared, and something different will be prepared, and he'll sign it nonetheless, and then exclaim that he's astonished and surprised. Maybe he's lying about that. But I don't know.
Groucho's got quotes that cover everything. You want principles? I'll give you principles. He said, those are my principles, and if you don't like them, I have others. And as a matter of fact, he has other principles on the principal committee, too.
He does. And they're no less troubling, a lot of them. And I would just say, it may be that you get overridden by a vote, and certainly if it came to a vote, you would lose it. But I'd be asking for, what would satisfy you? You say you don't know that that's a nomination? That's crazy. What do you want? What I want is, if the president wants us to believe that he is affixing his hand to these nominations, orders, presidential findings, whatever it is, come to the Capitol. We have a desk for you. You used it on day one. Have a seat. I'll watch. You sign it. I'll watch you read it. I may disagree with what's in it, but at least I'll know that that's it. That's a horrible waste of your time, but I don't care because I don't want you doing anything else with it.
Well, another Groucho Marx quote here, and let's just, instead of book, just insert executive order.
All right.
And he said, from the moment I picked up your executive order until I put it down, I was convulsed with laughter. Someday I intend reading it. He's got all these things in front of him, and why is the assumption that Trump read it before he signed it?
Yeah, absolutely.
Why do reporters assume he knows what's in it? Why do reporters assume he knows what the implications are? Why do reporters assume that this is what he intended? Why don't you start reporting it as if a whole bunch of people gave a confused old man, readings the sign and said sign them, and then he did. Why don't you report it that way? What's so different about my suggestion as compared to your suggestion? Why is your suggestion more reality than mine?
Mine?
Mine
Are
is
you
that he
yelling at
doesn't know
me?
what he's doing.
I don't think it
My
is different.
suggestion is that they give him stuff and he signs it and he has no clue.
Yes.
Why don't you report it that way?
Oh, I don't know. I will. But
Not
they
you
won't.
personally, but
Oh,
I mean the
see, I don't
media,
understand these
the
pronouns.
journalists, the courtiers who sit around the president, currying for favor and trying to get some face time and attention.
I agree. This is easier to see now. I give them mostly a pass on the first couple of them, even though, I mean, I think we all on this side knew that was a possibility. That's
Like
the way
since
we
last
usually do
April.
things. Yeah. But yeah, okay, the guy is president, and maybe they thought, even on the Reagan model, okay, maybe Reagan didn't read it, but he had James Baker preparing the things. Well, he doesn't have a James Baker.
Point of order, Mr. Radio Show host.
Yes.
We've been talking about this for months and months and months, and if we could see it, why couldn't they see it? I don't buy that for a minute. Why were they doing it? And it's because of Jeter's answer. They need it because that's their living.
Yeah, I mean, there is that. You've pointed that out to us before, that if someone's livelihood depends on their not seeing it.
They're not going to see it.
Yeah.
Right.
Well,
Up
things
in
may
Sinclair,
change.
He said that back in the 30s, 100 years ago.
Well,
almost.
the reason I replied, I mean, the thing that you saw, now you got me, yeah.
You're on my side. I'm just making a point here.
Yes. But I was going to say, the reason that I replied in particular with this is a thought that I've had before, expressed before, written before, spoken on the show before. The reason I replied to Senator Blumenthal in particular was I would like him to go and do that, and that's going to be a tall order. But if you wanted the courtiers to think that about Trump, one thing that would go a long way would be for someone like Senator Blumenthal to enter the committee hearing room and do this. And it has the added benefit of the policy end he's hoping to achieve. It will slow down the process. And people will say, but you're dragging your feet. Yeah, I'm dragging my feet. There's a crazy man appointing people to positions in the government. I'm going to drag every foot I can find. If you've got a spare one, you should drag it too.
Because that leads to my last piece that I want to go over today, which is a Charles M. Blow column today, which is entitled Pause This Presidency.
Just so we can figure out what's going on.
Exactly.
All right.
And so I think I have it in there, but let me just put it at the end of the list so it's easier for you to find.
Well, okay, I'll just wait then.
American people must immediately demand a cessation to all consequential actions by this president.
Okay.
Says. President in quotes.
Oh.
Until we can be assured that Russian efforts to hack our election in a way that was clearly meant to help him and damage his opponent, because don't forget that is the big story still, did not also include collusion with or cover up by anyone involved in the Trump campaign and now administration.
Yeah,
this may sound extreme, but if the gathering fog of suspicion should yield an actual connection, it would be one of the most egregious assaults on our democracy ever. He uses the same construction as the Trump people do.
Yeah, that is.
If we found out that Obama did this, it would be the most horrible thing since ever. Well, yeah.
Maybe that's good then.
Yeah, it is good, because after all, it's the same thing Trump says, so you can't attack it. The point is, you can't know till you get a special prosecutor, so get the special prosecutor. But Blow makes the point, viewed through the serious lens of these epic implications, no action to put this presidency on pause is extreme. Rather, it is exceedingly prudent.
There you go.
And he says you should do these things, and he says, in the end, look, one of three things is true here. Either Obama, during the waning months of an 8-year term free of personal scandal, decided to maliciously and illegally tap the phones of the candidate all the polls at the time predicted would lose.
That's all good points.
A law enforcement agency was able to present evidence and convince a federal judge that somebody or some group of people in Trump Tower were engaged in illegal activity.
Well, that's always true.
Or, the third one, this president, quotes around it, who has proven himself a pathological liar, is once again chasing conspiratorial windmills and seeking to distract and deflect from legitimate scandal. Any of these scenarios has profound consequences.
Yeah. The last two of which are actually true.
Right?
So,
So, he says, Charles Blow does, there's a hell of a lot of smoke here for there to be no fire. Maybe all the contacts with the Russians have been benign and believable. Maybe this is just the culmination of an extraordinary series of unfortunate incidents. I mean, he says extraordinary series of coincidences, but I'm thinking of Lemony Snicket and the children's books. I actually hope that's true. The alternative explanation is nearly unfathomable in its ability to injure our democracy. Whatever the case, we need answers before we simply pretend that there's some sort of political inertia pulling us forward and that the Trump agenda is inevitable and it's a consequence of a suspect election. No. Not true, he says. Stop and demand without equivocation, pause the presidency, and then, basically saying go on and just figure this out before you do anything else. It's too important.
Well, call Senator Blumenthal and send him this article and then have him tweet me. We'll talk.
I think I will.
And, honestly, I mean, I don't know that this fixes things. I mean, it doesn't put things bring things to a stop.
But a special prosecutor would.
That would certainly help. And that's something that isn't quite as easily dismissed as all that, although you may lose that vote on a party line vote as well. That's a bigger story, and that gives the whole thing legs, much more so even than saying, I don't know what the hell's on this paper, but you ought to do that too. Anything that eats up time and costs a vote should be done. But, you should absolutely be out there making the point that I don't know what this is. I don't know that Steve Bannon didn't just scribble Donald Trump on this.
Right. So let me give you two pieces, and I'll leave you. You can decide what to do with them. One of them is in the Washington Post, Ishan Tharoor. Trump's Twitter feed is a gateway to authoritarianism. And then Charles C.W. Cook, writing in National Review, also in your list here, you don't have to think Trump is an authoritarian to worry about his presidency. And Charles C.W. Cook, Never Trump conservative, makes the point that, he probably really is an authoritarian. But, there's just so much bad about this, it almost doesn't matter. Whereas Ishan Tharoor is writing about the fact that, the surreal standard set during the early weeks in office, Trump's tweets over the weekend has crossed the bigger line and a potentially dangerous turn in the course of American democracy. I think all of us have to take that point of view, and it's just interesting that reporters are now doing so. Again, I go back to you and say, we said this back in April. We said this back before the election. We are continuously disappointed by the fact that the election results suggest that the American people didn't see it, but since 2/3 of them now want a special prosecutor, now maybe they do.
Yes. Well, we'll see what Republicans come up with, and we'll have to have this vote a couple of times, I'm sure, because, this is going to take some time.
From the Republican point of view, let's just assume Trump is telling the truth and Obama did hack him. That special prosecutor should be empowered to look at everything. Go for it.
Yeah, I mean, that might
say
actually...
yes, vote for the special prosecutor. Let's just see where the data takes us.
I guess so. And I guess it's entirely possible that, like Ken Starr, you just get, we just happened to hire a guy who was more interested in pursuing the other side of the equation, and it never led anywhere, but we came up with something else along the way. And
over the course of, human events, these things take place.
Yes. I guess so. And, I suppose the import of impeaching Obama at this point is considerably less.
Yeah,
so
although
fine.
still there. They still want to throw him in jail and lock him up and lock her up and all that sort of stuff. Sure. Let's go for it. Let's look. So I have to say, the Monday shows that you and I do, it's becoming much easier to do because so much happens on weekends now.
Yes. I know. It used to be, what happened? I don't know. It used to be calm and there was no drama.
Yeah.
And the president
Remember
went
those
golfing.
days? Let's not think about too hard about that. So, this is Greg Dworkin speaking with my friend David Waldman Kagro in the morning on a Monday to start the week off. Lots happening. A lot more is going to happen. I think that Trump has crossed the threshold. Things are different from this point onward. Even the most skeptical and jaded and cynical of the reporters. We read some columns from Chris Eliza, for example. Even those who are members of the Church of the Savvy, as Jay Rosen likes to call them, can't just sit there and say, look how I admire how he lies, because the lies are so big that you can't do that anymore. This just feels like Watergate.
Yeah.
And we'll see where it takes us.
Yes, eventually. We have no choice.
Take care, and I'll talk to you on Wednesday, and you'll have the show tomorrow. And, of course, you got another hour to talk about stuff today. Who knows where you're going to take us, because,
there's too much. There's no way to pin it down. We'll do our best.
Even afterwards? I don't know about that. It's a great listen for those of you who don't have a chance to listen live. Go back and listen to the podcast. That's the way I do it for the second half of the show.
Okay.
And in any case, see you on Wednesday.
Yes, thanks very much, Greg. A good start. Good to see you again at the beginning of the week. Hear you again anyway. I hereby listening to you when you call on Skype. That's how I almost forgot that was the way the weekend began, with a presidential tweet storm and delete, I guess a presidential delete storm as much as anything else. Trump, I guess, in attempting to mock the calls for a special prosecutor on the Russian connections, he himself called for, I think mockingly, an investigation first of Nancy Pelosi because he came up with a picture of her meeting a Russian ambassador at some point previously in her career. Though, again, I think at some point she had said, I've never met the Russian ambassador, which, see, I don't know exactly how she put it, but that would seem a stretch, really, for somebody who's been in politics for that long to have never met the Russian ambassador at any point ever. I think that, although that was part of Trump's point, which is that, service in the government sometimes leads to weird things like meeting the Russian ambassador. And that is true. Of course, Trump hasn't been in government for more than a month. Sessions, of course, has been, but then he made weird claims about why he met the Russian ambassador after denying that he had. But yes, as bad as it is as cover to say, well, sure, I met the Russian ambassador, but it was in the course of regular business for someone like Sessions, since nobody else on the Armed Services Committee, which is what he claimed it was attached to, had ever met the Russian ambassador in that capacity. The whole thing was really rather weird. He also then, he called for an investigation of Pelosi and for Schumer, and pointing out that they had, in fact, met Russians before. That was, of course, a conflation of all the things that we're actually worried about with the Russian contacts. But, okay, so it was a poke at the other side there. And not particularly funny, but okay, neither is Trump. Anyway, the part that was funny was in calling for an investigation. I hereby demand a investigation into Nancy Pelosi, which he spelled HEAR space BY. As I mocked him, I hear by using my ears. That's what you do with ears. You don't, because of course yours are covered with crazy glue and hair, but okay, whatever. Others, maybe like a snake, you hear by your, what do snakes use for it? It's not ears. Eyes, tongue, what are they? I forget which of the senses is transposed on a snake, but that's okay. I'm not a snake. And I don't need to keep up with these things. But I hereby demand an investigation. And then he realized, oh my God, or maybe somebody told him, I don't know how it came to his attention. That's not how you spell hereby, you dummy. So he deleted it. Then everybody laughed at him for deleting it, and then he brought it back out because it was, damn it, I have a serious point to make. I, HEAR, no space, BY, demand an investigation. No, Donald, you idiot. It's not. There's no A in it. It's not HEAR at all. It doesn't matter. The space wasn't the problem. And then he deleted that one and came back again a third time, although somebody said it was the fourth attempt at it. HEREBY. Yes, I finally figured out how to spell hereby. I thought that was going to be the joke for the weekend. Turned out not to be the case. By Saturday morning came the presidential tweet storm. Well, presidential in the sense that the guy who did it was the president. There's nothing presidential about it, like the speech. And we were off to the races on a different subject. Then, of course, Saturday night came around. Saturday Night Live was on again, live, and they had a great show. Although it focused mostly on Sessions, there was no Donald Trump bashing, or, no, that's wrong. It's not that there was no Donald Trump bashing. It's that there was no Donald Trump skit. Alec Baldwin took the weekend off. And instead, let's see, Kate McKinnon did her fantastic Jeff Sessions, which was really interesting. Jeff Sessions as Forrest Gump. It was a great open. And then I guess for the rest of the show, she just dressed up as Kellyanne Conway and was kneeling on various bits of furniture and using her phone. So that was funny too. There's a lot of good stuff. And then by the Sunday shows, everyone was worried about the stability of the presidency and the country itself. And what are we going to do if the president's a habitual liar? Well, the president is a habitual liar, and it's not just about Russia. And it's not just about the size of his inauguration crowd. And it's not just about himself, even. There's a huge issue just swirling around his being able to tell the truth about anything. So let's see. I mean, we can start at the periphery, I guess, and see if is this possible that I didn't put this in Pocket? I'm beginning to doubt whether or not my Pocket works exactly as advertised, or it may be that I'm hitting the button on this stuff too early with the Washington Post things. But there was a Washington Post piece this morning, and I'll try and track it down. I think that's what happened. Sometimes if you hit the button too early, it just... no, it went to the right place. Maybe it's just an issue that Pocket has in saving this stuff. On the page where it displays it to me, it doesn't tell me the headline I'm looking for. It just tells me Washington Post. This is it. The least of the issues. Shall we start that way and work our way in? I don't know. We'll see how long I can tolerate the fringes. Here's a piece from Todd Frankel, whose name I do not believe we've called on the show before. Washington Post. How Foxconn's broken pledges in Pennsylvania cast doubt on Trump's jobs plan. Now, you didn't think I was going to go there. You thought I would focus on the major stuff. And it may be that we end up there. We don't know. But I wanted to put this out there. Things large and small, you can't trust this guy. When we were talking to Greg, we jumped right into the basic stuff. The big stuff and small stuff that's earth-shattering. And I think it was Ben Sasse, whose name I never did learn to pronounce, the senator from Nebraska, put it really well too. Let me see if I can grab that and pull that up in my Twitter timeline. He had a very interesting way of expressing his concerns about the way that Trump was ruining the processes that make government work in Washington. And even if I can't find it very quickly, I will tell you this. The phrase that grabbed me was that he said it was a civilization warping situation. And I thought that really stated the scale of it pretty well. There's the Blumenthal thing that I wanted to put aside as well. But I think this came earlier. But civilization warping, what do we mean by that? Well, I think you can get the idea of it. Here we go. So Sass or Sassy, which I would prefer. I wish that was the way he pronounced his name. Put this out. His statement on wiretapping was what he put out. And he said, the president today made some very serious allegations, and the informed citizens, that's, I think he informed citizens, that a republic, I can't even see, what is this here? How come that's in the way? The president today made some very serious allegations, and the informed citizens that a republic requires, there we go. Now it makes sense. The informed citizens that a republic requires deserves more information than he gave you in his very serious allegations. You get it? If there were wiretaps of then candidate Trump's organization or campaign, then it was either with FISA court authorization, maybe, or some other court, depends on what was tapped, but we don't know. That's part of the problem. FISA court authorization or without such authorization. If without, and I guess I'll pause here too, right? It would have been probably under the FISA court's authorization if whoever's phones were being tapped or against whomever the surveillance was directed. If the allegation was that they were conducting espionage or in contact with foreign agents that needed to be monitored for intelligence purposes, then sure, FISA would be the way to do it. On the other hand, people do get wiretapped here in this country, even if they are American citizens, and it may have nothing to do with Russia or any other country. If you are just a plain old criminal, racketeer or otherwise, and the government suspects that that's the case, and they can show probable cause, they can go right ahead and tap your phones. It's not illegal to do that. We do forget he could just be a regular old criminal, whoever was being monitored. And again, we don't know. That's one of the bigger parts of the big picture. still not filled in, right? Trump does something as vague as tweeting that Trump Tower had its phones tapped. Whose? The front desk? You? The campaign? The old apprentice offices? Felix Sater? One of any number of people who've actually been dragged out of Trump Tower in handcuffs in the past? Don't forget, Trump Tower, as I've said before, is the nearest thing on Earth to Mos Eisley Space Station. It is a hive of scum and villainy, and it is packed to the rafters with racketeers and criminals of all kinds. I would guess that there's a wiretap on phones in Trump Tower all the time. Not necessarily on Donald Trump, not necessarily on anybody that has anything to do with Donald Trump. It could just be some other criminal scumbag who happens to rent an apartment from Donald Trump in Trump Tower. Donald Trump loves to surround himself with criminal scumbags in that tower, and the less time he spends there, the better. The more time the government spends wiretapping it, probably the better too. But okay, that's not what I meant. I just want to put that out there. We don't have to narrow it down to, well, it was either with, and it's not even very much of a narrowing to say, well, it was either with FISA court authorization or it wasn't. That's the entire universe of foreign intelligence surveillance covered there. Well, if it had to do with foreign intelligence, it either had a FISA warrant or it didn't. No, duh. Of course. But what if it wasn't FISA activity at all? What if it wasn't Donald Trump at all? What if it wasn't Trump headquarters at all? It just happened in Trump Tower, and it was another international gambling ring run by Russian mobsters, as has been the case in the past. We don't know. But back to Ben here. We'll let him have his say. So, if there was wiretapping, then it was either with FISA court authorization or not. If without, the president, Trump, the one we have now, should explain what sort of wiretap it was, because he can find that out. And he can declassify anything he wants to instantaneously just by virtue of being the president, so he doesn't have to worry about that. He should let us know what sort of wiretap it was and how he knows that it exists. It is possible that he was illegally tapped. On the other hand, if it was with a legal FISA court order, then an application for surveillance exists that the court found credible. The president should ask that this full application regarding surveillance of foreign operatives or operations be made available, ideally to the full public, and at a bare minimum to the United States Senate. He's Senate-centric, you see, being a senator. We are in the midst of a civilization-warping crisis of public trust. That's worth remembering. I like that one. We are in the midst of a civilization-warping crisis of public trust. And the president's allegations today demand the thorough and dispassionate attention of serious patriots. And by the way, of patriots who use still two spaces after periods in the word processing era. Don't do it. Ben does it. You shouldn't. A quest for the truth, the full truth rather than knee-jerk partisanship must be our guide if we are going to rebuild civic trust and health. And I bring that up because I think it's important. It's going to be an overarching theme today and probably, for the next 3.75 years, let's say, and maybe even a little bit more. It comes down to, when you say civilization warping, it really does reach the level where if people were honest and taking care that the law be faithfully executed, etc., you would be questioning, is this supposed nomination backed up by paper? Is that paper really signed by the president? Can we prove that that's his signature? These are all things that, think about that, about the signature. You do this all the time, or at least you used to. Maybe you're all savvy and electronic and online now, but you used to do these things called checks, right? You would scribble on a piece of paper, essentially. The way Jerry Seinfeld used to put it. I don't have any cash on me, but if you talk to these people, that's essentially all a check is. And the whole world revolved for 150 plus years on the handshake and the signature, basically. If I sign this thing, if we make enough laws to dissuade people, strong enough laws to dissuade people from simply signing their name on a piece of paper and saying it's worth money, then people will take it seriously, and then we can have a system of commerce whereby you scribbling on a piece of paper equals money. And I have to imagine that that's central to whatever it is that Donald Trump calls his wealth. I imagine it all dries up pretty quickly. It dries up for a lot of people, but him in particular. Things dry up pretty quickly if you can no longer persuade anyone to believe that his signature means that you'll get cash in the end. But think about how much hinges on a signature, right? This thing is a law because the president signed it. Now, that's a terrible example, actually, because, of course, we all know from our study of the Constitution and listening to the show that even if he doesn't sign it, after 10 days it becomes, it has the force of law, as though he had signed it, unless Congress, by their adjournment, thereby prohibit him from returning it with a veto statement. Yeah, anyway. But if you sign a check, somebody gets cash. If you give them a check that says, I fully intend that this person get $10 from me from this bank account, and you don't sign it, they will not get that money. And if you've ever wondered, how does the bank even keep... Nobody, there's no way with all the things that they have to do that a bank teller, who they sometimes pay minimum wage to, is able to look at one of these things and say, oh yeah, that is Mr. Jones's signature. I know him. That's exactly how it goes. I have no doubt about its validity. Let's cash the check. You could, honestly, if you scribbled Donald Trump on the thing, they would cash the check. But all they're looking for is a signature, and there's other backup mechanisms to getting their money back somehow, or at least putting somebody in jail if they screw up and they cash these things and it turns out not to be good. There's a whole system involved in all of that. But that's what hinges on a signature. And we still make a lot of stupid things hinge on a signature. When Congress passes a law, it's not just the president's signature that makes it a law. If it arrives at the president's desk without the signature of the officers of Congress saying, I attest that this is a true copy of the enrolled bill, they go through all sorts of officialdom, right? There has to be signatures on this thing in order to make it work. Donald Trump, he could be ordering all sorts of things out there, but of course the executive orders, for whatever reason, in most cases, they require a signature. I don't know what it is. It's the symbol that you have given it personal attention, and by affixing your signature, in most cases, you are assumed to have read what's in there. In the case of us lay people, right? You do something dumb like electronically sign or check off the box that I read the terms and conditions. That's it. It says right in there that by clicking on this button, you indicate that you have thoroughly reviewed this whole thing. And that's what the signature did. Back in the olden days, by signing a document, signing an executive order, you're saying not only did I read the whole thing and agree with it, but it is my order. And you can tell. And the fact that we even make them do that anymore. How can we tell it's your order? Well, there's my signature on the bottom. Back in the days when there were no biometrics and no other way of, no photographic evidence that could be offered, no way of letting anybody know that the president really ordered this thing other than, well, he's got a very distinctive signature and, I guess anybody could forge it. It's not like they hadn't heard of forgeries in the 1700s. But on my honor, something. Why, I would never, and of course you go to jail for forging things like that if you get caught too. So that was supposed to dissuade people. There's very little standing in the way of just simply forging. Probably some pretty insane stuff could have been done. And it probably just hasn't happened until now, unless in the movies, when Bob Alexander and Dave sat there at the desk and pretended to be signing as the president, perhaps you remember the scene. And the fact that there's a name on there is supposed to put that person on the hook for stuff. There's all sorts of archaic garbage that we still hang on signatures because that's just the way we've always done it. But take all of that away. If you literally can't trust that that's his signature, or you literally can't trust that he has read the thing despite the fact that he has signed it, everything is going to take forever. There's so many shortcuts built into the way we do business that would make everything insane, impossible. Think about the monetary system. Cash, paper money. What the hell are we trading paper money for? I sound like now I'm going to be Rand Paul. Should we go back to the gold standard? Well, I should hope not. Gold is not particularly transportable. It's one of the problems with gold. It's extremely heavy. It's one of the fancy things. People like it, etc. It feels substantial. But if you had to, let's say this. If you had to pay to construct a hotel in Azerbaijan with gold, that stuff would never get done. It couldn't. How would you, you eventually could ship the gold to Azerbaijan, yes, but it would take forever. We want things to be easy, transportable, speed of electronic transactions, etc. One of the things we've discussed on the show before, how do things get so out of whack with respect to the balance of power as between capital and labor? We're a capitalist society. Why is that? Why are we a capitalist society? What is capitalism? Why does capital take supremacy over any of the other terms in the equation that add up to production, right? The means of production. There's capital, there's labor, etc. Why does labor get the short end of the stick? Partially, one of my pet theory is capital is portable. Capital is fungible. Labor is not. And it's just harder to, move it around and leverage it than it is with capital. You need labor and capital to get this thing done. It could be anybody's capital. It could come from anywhere, and it can be transferred around the globe in the blink of an eye. It shows up, and everybody trusts they're going to get paid. Labor, well, so far, no transporter beams. We can't move people around. The people have to know how to do this labor. You bring me bricklayers, that's fine, but I have a plumbing job. I need different guys. You would think that would command a higher price, but instead, there are other plumbers around, and you can just fire them, or you can come up with other capital, too. But whatever it is, for some reason, flexibility works for capital. Flexibility doesn't work so well for labor. We have all kinds of issues we're not going to straighten out here and now, but all of that advantage that goes to capital also evaporates if something as stupid as the signature goes away. Something as stupid as the assumptions that we make based on the fact that this box has been checked, something's been scribbled on that line, this guy says he's good for it, the deal goes through. Nothing happens if you have to verify everything. You can't ship gold to Azerbaijan. You bring me a nomination. I say, what's this? You say it's the president's nomination for Deputy Attorney General. I say, who's the president? What's this? I don't even understand what this scribble is. These words don't mean anything. That's a fake guy. Anything you say could screw things up. We're not supposed to say those things because you look like an idiot saying that's not a nomination or the president didn't really do this. Because the president always did do this, but now I don't know if he does anymore. And he certainly doesn't understand it when he scribbles it. Is that enough? Well, on a mechanical level, no. What happens, right? In comes the communication. How did these nominations get to Congress? How does Grassley know that a guy's been nominated for Deputy Attorney General? And he has been. Under the normal process, you would think there's no problem with this. The technical aspects of it, right? The president actually has somebody type this stupid thing up and says, I hereby, and it probably spells it wrong, I hereby nominate for the office of Deputy Attorney General of the United States, Department of Justice, whatever the guy's name is. I forget. I already forgotten what the guy's name is. But just for the record, I guess we should look it up. It won't be on the schedule page for the floor. It would be in the Senate Judiciary page. Seriously, they made a nomination, and I don't even know who it is. And you know what? Neither does the president. That's one of the things they ought to do, right? At a press conference or wherever he's available, assuming he's available, and I don't know that he is, just shout out the question. Mr. President, who's your nominee for Deputy Attorney General? Right? You think I'm crazy. You think, it's not the case that he doesn't know, that he doesn't read these things. Ask him. Now, it may be that ordinarily presidents don't offhand remember. I signed so many goddamn things, I got no idea who I nominated for this job. And that might be true for all presidents. But okay, fine. Nobody asked that question before because they trusted that the president trusted the people around him to deal with this stuff. And I don't know that I trust him. He may trust them, but I can't. How do you trust a guy who secretly sneaks himself onto the National Security Council? So ask him, does he know? If he doesn't, you say, that is weird, because we used to just trust that you did. But now, I've never asked the question before. Maybe I should have, but I never did. I am now, and you don't know. That's weird. The guy's name is Rod Rosenstein, Deputy Attorney General nominee. There's an Associate Attorney General nominee on the table as well, Rachel Brand, about whom I know nothing, but there will be hearings about it Tuesday, tomorrow, March 7th at 10 a.m., Grassley will be cheering. You should stand up and say, I don't know who the hell these people are. Let's look into it. The president signs such a paper. He messengers it over. Literally, it has to be carried over to Congress. And you'll see, that's where you see the doorkeepers and the Senate Secretary of the Senate staffers coming in and occasionally interrupting proceedings. Mr. President, meaning the President of the Senate. And he'll acknowledge him and say, I am directed to deliver to the Senate a message in writing from the President of the United States, or something like that. And the Senate simply receives it. I think we've actually brought this up before. The Senate, there's no procedure other than to say, okay, thanks, and take it. Because once again, until now, there has never been any reason to do anything other than to say, you have a piece of paper there that you purport to be a message from the President of the United States. I'll believe it. He's in this town, and that's just paper. It's not like it's a bag of gold. Looks pretty easy to carry. My guess is it is a piece of paper signed by the President of the United States, despite the fact that I know for a fact it could have been forged. It's easy enough to do. Why would they? Same question about Donald Trump. Why would they? Maybe because he's secretly naming himself to something. Let me see this thing. And there's a lot of assumption that goes into it, including something that's not going to be provable in any kind of debate on the Senate floor, which is that the president is mentally competent to have understood the thing, even if he didn't read it. If he sat down and read it now, would he understand what it means? Maybe, maybe not. Not sure. Can't tell. Don't wanna. That's one of the big problems too, right? I don't even want to know. But there's no mechanism for saying, wait a second. So I don't know what they would do, right? If I'm on the floor, though, as a senator, I guess I'd say, Mr. President, I don't know, under what circumstances, I'd like to take a point of, a question of the privileges of the Senate. I know in the House, they have a question of the privileges of the House. I don't know if the Senate has the same thing, but they ought to have some sort of analog to it. What I mean is, on behalf of the Senate, I don't know that we ought to be saying that the United States Senate, certainly not without a vote, that the United States Senate as a body accepts that that piece of paper, if there even is one in that envelope, is what the guy says it is, or is what the president thinks it is, or is what the president says it is, or hopes it is. I don't simply want to say, yeah, that's from the president, let's read it. So I haven't even gotten to the point where I know that Rod Rosenstein has been nominated for sure. I might have read it in the paper. They might have told it to a reporter because I just signed the paper that says I nominated him. I'll tell you what, Mr. President, what did you just sign? I signed an order nominating, it wouldn't be an order, but I signed something nominating Rod Rosenstein to be Deputy Attorney General. The newspapers write it. No problem, except now, because, of course, what would actually happen? Mr. President, what did you sign? I nominated somebody. It's a nomination for Deputy Attorney General. Who did you nominate? And if the paper's out of his hand, forget it. I don't know. Some guy. I mean, we've actually seen, they've videotaped all of his, and streamed live every time he signs anything. And he'll be signing executive orders and telling the press who are assembled to watch, we're signing a very important executive order that's going to help loosen up regulations about, and I'll pause and turn around. Tell me, what are we doing? Whose nomination am I signing? It's been something that's been worked on very hard by this special person right here. We've seen that happen too. I don't even know who this special person is. But I'm assured that this special person has been working on this for a long time. We don't know. We don't know what he knows. And so I say question it. Is that a piece of paper? Does it have a nomination on it? Is the nomination Rod Rosenstein? Did the person who signed the paper, was it the president? Is the president, has he got any idea who Rod Rosenstein is? Does it matter if he does? What if it's a Caligula's horse? I don't know. How crazy do you have to be before you say, maybe the president's not even in his right mind. He's just signing whatever they give him. Maybe Rod Rosenstein is a horse. I don't know. Could we find out? You really literally have to bring it down to that level. And you can bring it down to that level if there's a problem with trusting that the president is competent in any basic way whatsoever, and is also surrounded by people who are known to be bad actors when it comes to giving him crap to sign. You see what I'm getting at here? And I'm not just the only one. If I was the only one, that would be fun and everything. It's fun to be a little crazy. It's fun to warp civilization with Ben Sass, but I am not the only one, and I can maybe prove it if I can go into Pocket and find all the things that I've been holding out with. Let's see. So I said we were going to start at the periphery, and I couldn't stay there. I jumped right into it, but I'll get back to the jobs issue. But I need to now prove that I'm not the only one who says this kind of stuff about the president. Where were we with these things? There are... here we go. A piece from Lawfare that I think, well, a number of people sent it to me, but I think Greg also forwarded it on to me after I made my comments to Senator Blumenthal's tweet saying, you really have to be questioning the very mechanics of all this stuff. Benjamin Wittes, whose name gets called all the time as one of the conservative commentators, they're all conservative commentators at Lawfare, whose title for his piece is, What Happens When We Don't Believe the President's Oath? Oh, yeah, the oath that he took. Now, what do you mean, don't believe the president's oath? You mean that he didn't mean it, or that we don't think the words mean anything? What exactly is it we're talking about? By the way, there's an additional writer on this thing, Ben Wittes, and also Quinta Jurecic, I'm going to guess at her last name here. The two of them put this piece together. The Constitution's eligibility requirements for the presidency are spare. And in every formal sense, at least Donald J. Trump, I like to call him Donald P. Trump, and you know why, meets them all. He was elected with a majority of electoral votes in a fashion that comports with the 12th Amendment. I mean, this is what I guess you would call damning with faint praise in terms of, yeah, you won the election. That is to say, you're over 35, you supposedly won a majority of electoral votes in a fashion that comports with the 12th Amendment. While he famously questioned his predecessor's birth certificate and citizenship, by the way, interesting, right? So we actually have a history of questioning very, very basic assumptions with Donald Trump, and it's no problem when he does it. They elect the guy president, he says, show me the birth certificate. All right, here's the birth certificate. How do I know it's not forged? That's crazy, but okay, it's a question. I mean, things can be forged. How do we prove it? We don't have videotape of the doctor filling it out. I guess you could say we have a point. If that's the case, well, that's rather civilization warping, but watch what happens when we do it to you. Oh, no, you don't. Right? While he famously questioned his predecessor's birth certificate and citizenship, nobody seems to doubt his, right? Trump is, as Article 2, Section 1, Clause 5 requires, a natural-born citizen. He has attained the age of 35 years, with some years to spare, actually, and he has certainly, quote, been 14 years a resident within the United States, unquote. And finally, on January 20th, 2017, in apparent accordance with Article 2, Section 1, Clause 8, I love the way this is written, before he entered on the execution of his office, he took the following oath or affirmation. I do solemnly swear that I will faithfully execute the office of the President of the United States and will, to the best of my ability, preserve, protect, and defend the Constitution of the United States. And they include the video of him doing just that, just by way of proving things even to skeptics like me. There's only one problem. Well, there are many, but there's only one problem they talk about with Trump's eligibility for the office he now holds. The idea of Trump's swearing this or any other oath solemnly is, not to put too fine a point on it, laughable. As more fundamentally is any promise on his part to faithfully execute this or any other commitment that involves the centrality of anyone or anything other than himself. Do you see what they're saying here? This is, again, one of those areas where constitutional law gets a little wacky and gray, right? Well, he meets all the qualifications The Electoral College has voted. They picked him. He's 35. He's been 14 years a resident of the United States as a natural-born citizen, and he took the oath. But did he? What do you mean? He said the words. Yes, but the words say that you solemnly swear that you'll really do all these things. Can he solemnly swear anything? Really, it's down to that. The article continues. Indeed, a person who pauses to think about the matter has good reason, to doubt the sincerity of Trump's oath of office, or even his capacity to swear an oath sincerely at all. We submit that huge numbers of people, including important actors in our constitutional system, have not even paused to consider it. They are instinctively leery of Trump's oath and are now behaving accordingly. This reality, and we argue here that it is a reality, is already conditioning the Trump presidency in overt ways visible every day. What's more, we submit that these doubts about the president's oath will inevitably shape public and institutional reaction to his service. And as a predictive matter, we believe that doubts about the president's oath will have important and negative implications for the future of the American presidency. To be clear, we are not suggesting that the sincerity of the presidential oath presents any sort of justiciable question. To the contrary, what makes the problem of Trump's oath vexing and difficult is precisely that it is quite improper for the judiciary to look behind a person's formal compliance with Article 2, Section 1, Clause 8, any more than the courts have mechanisms to verify that the content of a State of the Union address really meets the requirements of Article 2, Section 3. It's the very definition of a political question. Rather, our argument is both subtler and, in some respects, more dramatic. It is that the presidential oath is actually the glue that holds together many of our system's functional assumptions about the presidency and the institutional reactions to it among actors, from judges to bureaucrats to the press. All I've done here, my own parenthetical note, all I've done here is apply this to the Senate as well. Do you accept the communications of the President of the United States? Is he even the President of the United States if he can't actually seriously take an oath? I don't know. Well, we're not going to solve that here today. But it's out there. When large enough numbers of people within these systems doubt a president's oath or anything else about his presidency like that, attached to it, or any of the other norms, right? These assumptions cease operating. That's my point. That's where I said yesterday, and where Greg picked up on it. You know, when did I say that? I said first to Blumenthal that you ought to be doing this stuff. You ought to be asking these questions, right? Are you sure that the papers purporting to make the nominations are real? But in addition to that, eventually we got around to the additional point of, you know, do you want to know what chaos is really like? You want to talk about what real chaos is? Real chaos is not knowing whether anything coming out of the executive branch is real or valid in any serious way. I mean, what do you do with that? You don't think the nominations are real? What about presidential findings that trigger all sorts of statutes and statutory reaction in our code of laws? What about military mobilization orders? We're supposed to bomb Yemen. Says who? Says the president. I don't know if he said it. Maybe Steve Bannon wrote that. Maybe the president's crazy. I mean, that's something we at least have dealt with in the past. The idea, the question, what if the president's crazy? Is it an illegal order? Is it a war crime? Should we do it? There are procedures. There's training for that. Nobody ever knows what to do in real life when it happens, but there's training for it. What about if that guy isn't really the president because guess what? He didn't really mean his oath sincerely. We can't have that. We can't have that. I don't know how we deal with that. Let's go back to the article here and continue on, because it's civilization warping. I think Senator Sass had it right there. All right, but when large enough numbers of people within these systems doubt a president's oath or anything else, these assumptions cease operating. They do so without anyone's ever announcing, let alone ruling from the bench, that the president didn't satisfy the presidential oath clause and is thus not really president. They just stop working, or they work a lot less well. That is, we argue here, what we're seeing now. And the disruption in our expectations of the presidency and our civic and legal responses to it will, we suspect, have a very long tail. The day after the election, one of us wrote the following about his posture towards the new president-elect and the way he personally intended to cover Trump's administration on lawfare. Who wrote it? Let's see. Just to be, it's Witty's, his piece. Okay. And it said this: Trump's election will fundamentally change my work on this site over the next few years, and probably off the site too. Because at least for me, Trump does not enter office with the presumption of regularity in his work. That is to say, not normal, right? Okay. He does not enter office with the presumption that as president, he will pursue a vision of what national security means that is remotely related to my own, or that he will do so in a rational fashion, or even that he and I share a common idea of what aspects of this nation we are trying to secure. The sentiment received a fair bit of criticism from people who thought that no president deserved such a presumption. Glenn Greenwald is quoted herein. His tweet, which reads, "This is the skepticism that citizens and especially journalists should apply to all presidents. But either way, welcome Benjamin Witty's." Very interesting. Is Trump really, and that's not, I don't see how that's criticism, but okay. Anyway, I see. So the criticism is, welcome to the world. No president deserves the assumption that they are sane or going to operate within normal bounds. I don't know whether that's something Glenn Greenwald really believes, but okay. It's certainly a fun thought. Is Trump really different from any other president? Would an analyst attach a presumption of regularity to the conduct of a president in the first place? Why would an analyst attach that? There's a big, if somewhat ineffable difference between opposing a president and not believing his oath of office. All presidents face opposition, some of it passionate, extreme, and delegitimizing. All presidents face questions about their motives and integrity. Hating the president is a very old tradition, and many presidents face at least some suggestion that their oaths do not count. After all, Obama was foreign-born Muslim to most of his extreme detractors, or his most extreme detractors, yet for a variety of reasons we discuss below. There is something different about the question of Trump's oath, and it is how widespread and mainstream the anxiety is. It's also, and we want to be frank about this, how reasonable the anxiety is when applied to a man whose word one cannot take at face value on the pre-political trust the oath represents. Pre-political. That person does not get certain presumptions our system normally attaches to presidential conduct, or really I would say to any other kind of conduct. If they had been honest in the other parties to his business career, quote-unquote business career, during his career prior to politics, he'd be in prison. There'd be no way he'd be considered a rich guy. And even though here, among us, he's not considered a rich guy, because we don't believe that any of the things that he says about himself are true. But if you can fool the bank, then you're just de facto rich. If you can fool 5 people on the Supreme Court, you are de facto right about the way government works. In fact, even better, you are de jure right about how the government works. All right, back to the article. If you're a liberal, one who voted against George W. Bush twice, do the following thought experiment. Okay, good, cool. We can do that one. Probably you can too. Did you ever doubt, even as you decried the Iraq War and demanded accountability for counterterrorism policies and actions you regarded as lawless, did you ever doubt that Bush was acting sincerely in the best interests of the country as he understood them? Yes, people used the slogan, Bush lied, people died, but how many of them actually in their hearts doubted that Bush was earnestly trying to do his duty by the electorate, even if they differed in their understandings of what that duty entailed? Some, to be sure, we suspect many more accepted, though, that Bush was honestly doing his best. I think I might fall outside of that number. But I didn't think that he wasn't actually president, or wasn't actually sure that the things that he agreed with his advisors ought to be written down and signed were what got written down and signed. And that's from the most egregious example of the Bannon placement on the Principals Committee of the NSC down to the trivial, which we mentioned last week, which was that in several cases, it turns out, the text of executive orders displayed and passed out to the press was different from the text of the executive orders as entered into and displayed on the White House website. And we don't know which one went into whatever official box there is somewhere. This is the one that actually works, right? You ever score a sports game, or like I'm familiar with scoring a basketball game, right? The score on the scoreboard is nice and all, and that's the one that everybody looks at. But the score in the scorebook is the official score. If there's ever a discrepancy between the two, the scorebook wins. That's the rule. Well, which one of these executive orders wins? I assume there's a rule about that somewhere. So are we reading the right one or the wrong one when we read the newspaper? What about when we read the website? What about when the president signs one and hands it to us? If we can't trust that, even if we've witnessed the guy sign the goddamn thing and he hands it to me personally and I read it and that's not the text that was entered in the Federal Register, what good is that? And how can I trust anything? But I never felt that way about George Bush. I figured that the text was the same. If somebody told me it wasn't, I'd say, oh my God, he's crazy. And I did say that about a lot of things. But okay, I agree. There's something different here. One of those people, notably, was Barack Obama. That is to say, I guess, who believed that even though he disagreed with George W. Bush, that he was fundamentally doing his best. Over the summer, on Face the Nation, he answered a question about his predecessor by saying, first of all, George W. Bush, despite obviously very different political philosophies, is a really good man. Now ask, would you answer this question the same way about Trump as you would about Bush? And do you think Obama would? Okay, there you got me. I wouldn't answer it the same way. I might not say George W. Bush is a really good man, but there's no way in hell I would say that about Trump. And I would say, even if I didn't like either of them, even if I wouldn't say either of them are good men, I would say there are vast quantum differences between the two. Conversely, if you're a conservative who voted against Obama, do the same thought experiment in reverse. Did you ever doubt, even as you decried Obamacare and fumed that Obama was weakening America, that he was acting sincerely in the best interest of the country as he understood them? Yes, I have to believe that many of them did do that. Did you ever doubt that he was earnestly trying to do his duty by the electorate? And would you answer the question the very same way about Trump? I don't know. Bush's own reaction to his successors is instructive here. Bush notably chose to remain largely silent about Obama, and he explicitly tied this reticence to his respect for Obama's presidency. In 2009, in a speech, he said, "I love my country more than I love politics," memorably adding, "He deserves my silence." The mutual respect between Bush and Obama is not simply the cordiality of two establishmentarians who are both part of the President's Club, though that may be part of the story. It is, we believe, the cordiality of two people who respect one another's good faith, that is, who respect one another's oaths of office. And it stands in sharp contrast to the deference Bush has not shown to Trump. Over the last week alone, Bush has given 2 interviews containing barely disguised criticisms of the 45th president. On the Today Show, he emphasized the role of an independent press as indispensable to democracy, an obvious reference to Trump's attacks on the media as the enemy of the people. Answered a question on Trump's travel ban on refugees and immigrants from 7 majority Muslim countries by saying that, quote, "a bedrock of our freedom is the right to worship freely," unquote, and indicated support for an investigation into connections between the Trump administration and the campaign and the Kremlin. In People magazine, he said of the mood under the new administration, "I don't like the racism, and I don't like the name-calling, and I don't like the people feeling alienated." There's actually a good reason, lots of good reasons, why people react differently to Trump. Why, that is, they don't merely oppose him politically, but seem to doubt whether he's earnestly committed to trying to the best of his ability to do the right thing by the country. To be sure, the doubt is by no means universal. As we write this, 43% of Americans approve of the president's performance so far, an unusually low figure for a new president, but nevertheless a significant portion of the country. Presumably, citizens who approve of Trump also believe in the integrity of the oath of his oath of office. But that leaves huge numbers of people who are harboring doubts. And the doubts are not limited to the fringe. On the contrary, the belief that there is something different about this presidency is extraordinarily common among sober commentators of both the left and right, and even more notably among many of those with significant experience in government in both career and political roles. So, why the doubts? For one thing, Trump's highly erratic statements and behavior include any number of incidents that seem to reflect a lack of understanding of his office or its weight. It's not just the tweets. This is a person, after all, who suggested before the election that he might not even serve as president if he prevailed. Do you remember that one? Who then said that he would accept the results of the election if I win. Who made up a whole lot of voter fraud, who promised to prosecute his opponent, who in his first public address following the inauguration stood in front of the CIA's memorial wall and bragged falsely about the number of people who attended his inaugural ceremony, who has made use of the immense power of the bully pulpit to publicly complain about the unfair decision by a private retail company to drop his daughter's fashion line, who approached the process of selecting a Secretary of State, National Security Advisor, and nominee to the Supreme Court in a manner more fit for reality television than the office of the presidency. Central casting, right? Who refused to accept responsibility for the death of a Navy SEAL in a botched counterterrorism raid conducted on his orders. We'll talk about that sometime this week, too. Claiming instead that this was something they, the generals, wanted to do, before standing in front of Congress and apparently ad-libbing that the SEAL was looking down with happiness from heaven because Trump received extended applause during his address. And whose most memorable quotation coming out of the presidential campaign was the inimitable, "Grab 'em by the pussy," a phrase he then dismissed as locker room talk. Moral seriousness and respect for his office, just isn't his thing. This is also a person whose campaign was rife with promises to commit crimes and to abuse the powers of the very office for which he then took the oath. The combination of the sprawling nature of his business and the intentional obscurity of his finances is also a factor. Emoluments, right? And there's more to come on that too. A person who takes an oath yet maintains financial entanglements that create potential conflicts of interest. Forget potential. They're happening right now. Conflicts he refuses to acknowledge, and who shrouds the entire affair in a secrecy far in excess of predecessors whose finances presented far less complexity, invites doubt, to put it mildly. He invites questions about what else, other than his oath, may be guiding his behavior. This is particularly true when the financial relationship coexists with his bizarre solicitude for Russia, with which several of his aides have maintained financial and political relationships, and regarding which rumors have swirled about his own ties. One doesn't have to be a conspiracy theorist, given the circumstances, to ask the question about Trump's oath. What else is going on here? Then there's Trump's strange and adversarial relationship with the truth, a matter about which one of us has written at length. While Trump produces a stream of obvious and easily falsifiable fabrications, and the Washington Post keeps a convenient tally of presidential lies since his inauguration, a tally which currently stands at 190, the president is less of a liar than a BSer, I'll clean that one up, in the sense described by philosopher Harry Frankfurt, which is too bad that I didn't realize that they were going to cite him, because then you can say the word. If you cite him, I think you're allowed to say it. But we'll just be careful anyway. A BSer, in this technical sense, is a person who does not aim to obscure the truth so much as operates without any relationship to truth whatsoever. The liar, Frankfurt says, must have some knowledge of the facts at hand in order to conceal them. But to the BSer, facts are nothing more than an irrelevance. And Frankfurt's argument that this is what makes BS dangerous. The liar makes the key concession that there are indeed facts and they are in some way determinable or knowable. BS, on the other hand, glibly rejects the value and even existence of knowable facts. Trump's BS raised questions of its own when he was in the running for the presidency. But now that he has sworn the oath of office, we are forced to confront what it means for a BSer to have promised to faithfully execute the office of president and to preserve, protect, and defend the Constitution of the United States and the country's larger legal systems. BS, after all, is kind of the opposite of law, which is an organized system of meaning. There is a related concern about the take care clause, which, echoing the oath's requirement that the president faithfully execute the duties of the office, mandates that the president take care that the laws be faithfully executed. Can a BSer, whose entire method of engaging with the world is incompatible with the concept of fidelity, and whose fundamental slipperiness and laxity in shouldering responsibility makes impossible the notion of taking care, really fulfill the requirements of this clause? But the take care clause presentation of the problem necessarily presents the question in its specific as applied sense. Did the president take care in a particular instance that the law was faithfully executed? The oath presents the concern in general. It makes us ask, what does it even mean for a person who contradicts himself constantly, who says all kinds of crazy things, who has unknown but extensive financial dealings that could be affected by his actions, and who makes up facts as needed in the moment, to swear an oath to faithfully execute the office? What does that mean? The Presidential Oath Clause is not, shall we say, one of the Constitution's rock stars. The Federalist Papers barely mention it. It doesn't have a particularly extensive academic literature. No famous Supreme Court cases overtly turn on it or interpret it. An admittedly unscientific but nonetheless illustrative Twitter survey suggests that discussion of the oath is not dominating constitutional law classes either. Among 1,203 respondents, 90% recalled either no discussion, 70% of the oath in their classes, only a brief mention, and 20% said, 90% recalled either no discussion. How does this even work here? 90% no discussion, 70% I guess only a brief mention, 20% something else. I don't even know where this, I don't know how they're making this work here. But at any rate, basically the issue, there we go, 90% is made up of 70 and 20. So 90% recalled either no discussion of the oath or only a brief mention. And only 3% recalled lots of oath talk. I doubt there was really any at all. But no discussion of it, 70%. Brief mention, 20%. 7% said there was some mention, and 3% said lots. I'd love to know where they went. The presidential oath was introduced into the Constitution by one John Rutledge, who would later become the second Chief Justice of the United States. In its initial form, the oath read briefly, I solemnly swear or affirm that I will faithfully execute the office of President of the United States of America. That was it. The convention then added a second clause. Will, to the best of my judgment and power, preserve, protect, and defend the Constitution of the United States, following a proposal by George Mason and James Madison. The oath was then tweaked to replace judgment and power with abilities and power, and then to replace that with simply ability. Amidst these revisions, I guess they worked on this for some time, James Wilson, who would soon be appointed to the Supreme Court by George Washington, objected that the provision for a separate presidential oath was redundant, given the Constitution's pre-existing requirement that government officials all swear an oath. Notably, while this clause, listed in Article 4, Section 3 of the Constitution, requires that, quote, all executive and judicial officers, both of the United States and of the several states, shall be bound by oath or affirmation to support this Constitution, the Constitution leaves it up to Congress to determine the oath itself. Wilson's objection did not carry the day, however, and the result is the anomaly that the text of the presidential oath of office, but no other, is spelled out in the Constitution itself. The oath makes only scant appearances in Supreme Court case law and figures not at all in most of the seminal cases involving the scope of presidential power. But don't let that fool you. It is actually a fundamental underpinning not only of many of our cultural assumptions regarding presidential behavior, but also of the judiciary's willingness to grant deference to the executive branch, which actually does make a lot of appearances in court decisions, doesn't it? Particularly in the realm of national security. The point is actually not limited to the presidency. Oaths of office are, more generally, a foundational component of interbranch deference and comity. When the courts presume a statute constitutional, they do so because it was passed by a coordinate branch of government whose members swore oaths to protect the Constitution. The presumption of constitutionality is, in other words, a deference to the institution of a coordinate branch as populated by people who swear oaths to the Constitution. And by the way, they sign those oaths too. Every member of the House and Senate, they sign their oath book. At least in the Senate, I know they sign the oath book. I don't know, maybe the House doesn't have you do it. That came up in the context of trying to decide when a senator-elect actually became an official senator. Remember that was an issue? Again, that's just hearkening back to our earlier discussion about the weird symbolism we hang on signatures. But all of this stuff, I mean, it has analogs everywhere. The idea that we've sometimes explained to you as a matter of constitutional law, that when judges and justices make the presumption of at the outset of a statute's constitutionality, that it's something you have to prove violates the Constitution, and if you don't, it's otherwise presumed to be constitutional, grows, in this theory anyway, grows from the fact that we all know that the people who voted to pass it swore they were going to uphold and defend the Constitution. And we take them at their word. But what if you can't? So, where were we? The presumption of constitutionality, we explained. Similarly, when the courts presume regularity in executive behavior or defer to the executive branch on a matter entrusted to it, the source of the presumption is that the office holder has sworn an oath too. To understand the relationship between the oath and the deference to the president in national security matters, start with Joseph Story. In Commentaries on the Constitution, Story wrote of the oath of office generally, "Oaths have a solemn obligation upon the minds of all reflecting men. If in the ordinary administration of justice in cases of private rights or personal claims, oaths are required of those who try, as well as of those who give testimony, to guard against malice, falsehood, and evasion, surely like guards ought to be interposed in the administration of high public trusts, and especially in such as may concern the welfare and safety of the whole community." Of the presidential oath particularly, he said, "No man can well doubt the propriety of placing a president of the United States under the most solemn obligations to preserve, protect, and defend the Constitution. It is a suitable pledge of his fidelity and responsibility to his country, and creates upon his conscience a deep sense of duty. By an appeal at once in the presence of God and man to the most sacred and solemn sanctions which can operate upon the human mind. Once a government official, and particularly a president, swears the oath of office, in other words, we assume that the oath binds the person to a certain degree of public virtue and good faith, along with inculcating a sense of duty and responsibility. That is something we can defer to. For a practical example of this idea in the national security litigation space, consider the controversial 2011 Guantanamo habeas case in the D.C. Circuit, Lateef versus Obama, which turned on the question of whether an intelligence report of uncertain reliability was due a presumption of regularity. Writing for the court, Judge Janice Rogers Brown, of all people, held that the report could be presumed to be a reliable record of Lateef's statements on the ground that, in the absence of clear evidence to the contrary, courts presume that public officers have properly discharged their official duties. This presumption of regularity, Brown wrote, is founded on interbranch and intergovernmental comity. In other words, the presumption of regularity follows from the common experience that public officials usually do their duty, as Judge Karen LaCraft Henderson wrote in her concurring opinion in the case. And this common experience derives from the fact that in doing their duty, public officials are honoring their oaths. Follow the line of cases cited in Lateef and you'll quickly arrive at the 1827 case of Martin v. Mott, which the D.C. Circuit cited in American Federation of Government Employees versus Reagan as the source of the presumption. In Mott, the Supreme Court held, regarding the reviewability of the president's decision to call up the militia, that every public officer is presumed to act in obedience to his duty until the contrary is shown. While the court acknowledged the potential danger of deferring to the executive in a militia muster, it wrote that mitigating this concern are the high qualities which the executive must be presumed to possess of public virtue and highest devotion to the public interests. Is it valid? Chief Justice Roger Taney made a similar point some 20 years later in Luther v. Borden, citing Mott. The court declared non-justiciable the question of whether President John Tyler had, after recognizing Rhode Island's incumbent government as legitimate over the rebel government during the Dorr War, D-O-R-R, who remembers? No? Rightly made the determination to support the state's charter government in calling up the militia. Despite the potential for abuse of the presidential power to muster the militia, the court held the elevated office of the president, chosen as he is by the people of the United States, sorta, and the high responsibility he could not fail to feel when acting in a case of such moment, appear to furnish as strong safeguards against a willful abuse of power as human prudence and foresight could well provide. I guess to make long story short, ask yourself, do you believe that depth of thought is going into anything Trump does? In both Mott and Luther, in other words, the court argues that it owes the president deference because it must trust in his presidential virtue. This trust in the president's moral fiber and his or her sense of public responsibility derives not from a personal regard for the individual who happens to be president. It derives, rather, from the fact that he or she has been elected by the people, more or less, and that the deference is thus to the popular will. And also from the fact that his or her election was, as Story describes, subsequently solemnized by his oath of office. We're not even going to be able to get through all of this, which is amazing. How long and in-depth this is. Well, let's get through this end of this section and then just wrap up a few loose ends before handing things over. We got more to talk about for this week. Wow. There's even a school of thought that the oath of office is a critical foundation for inherent presidential powers. Dissenting in Youngstown, Chief Justice Fred Vinson cites the presidential oath clause in conjunction with Alexander Hamilton's description of the energy in the executive in Federalist 70 as evidence that the presidency was deliberately fashioned as an office of power and independence, which, he argues, grants the president expansive powers in a time of emergency. Likewise, the court in U.S. versus U.S. District Court, Keith, notes that implicit in that duty to preserve, protect, and defend the Constitution under the oath of office is the power to protect our government against those who would subvert or overthrow it by unlawful means. And according to Justice Lucius Lamar's dissent in re Nagel, another case involving questions of inherent presidential powers, the government argued before the court that the presidential oath, by necessary implication, invests the president with self-executing powers independent of statute. Unlike his brethren, Lamar did not find this argument convincing. Our point here isn't exhaustively to trace the history of the oath or its relationship to comity and deference. It's merely to point out that a lot actually turns on the oath, especially in areas in which the president asks for deference from other actors, or just demands it or just steals it from them. And it follows that when a president's oath is reasonably subject to question, the system frays and those systems of deference stop working. I gotta cut it off here. There's another section or even two, perhaps, in this, and I do want to continue to it. You should read it. I'll give you the link, of course. We made it through section 3 and all that. And, it touches on every piece of what what I was ranting and raving about before. Anyway, I want to tie up that one loose end. I told you, I started off, I said we were going to stay on the periphery, and I just couldn't tolerate it anymore. I wanted to get right down to the nitty-gritty. And I don't know whether that was the right way to present it or not. But I mentioned the periphery, by which I mean there are questions that are central to what the hell are we supposed to believe when this guy sends us an order or a presidential finding or a nomination or anything. And then there's all the way out in the beginning, things that are much more easy to grasp. What are we supposed to believe when this guy makes a campaign promise? Or what about when he wins the presidency and starts running around the country saying, I'm saving jobs here and there and the other place? We already doubt, those of us on this side, that he had anything to do with the jobs that he said he was claiming to save at the carrier plants, etc. We've known for a long time that most of these things were already in the works. And there's another example. That's what I was going to try and throw out there with the Foxconn story. Whose broken promise is it? I don't even know. Foxconn, manufacturing outfit, apparently the one that actually is best known, they say, for making Apple's iPhones all the way over in China. Well, they said at some point that they were going to hire up to 50,000 U.S. workers, and we're going to build a gigantic high-tech factory in the Harrisburg or central Pennsylvania area. People were thrilled to death. We're going to bring back jobs, manufacturing to these places where they've lost so many jobs. And pretty much as you might have expected from Trump, we're getting the same this time from the companies. I guess Trump is in it for the press release, and so the companies are as well. As they point out in here in this piece in the Washington Post, locals were giddy. Foxconn had a small office here, but this sounded like something next level, right? But the factory never built. The jobs never came. It just sort of all went away, and I suspect that a lot of this stuff will all just go away. Is that routine campaign promises gone bad? Is it even his fault? Did he know? Did Foxconn know they weren't going to do it? I don't know. We can't tell. It's the small, it's the big, it's the routine, it's the lies from the campaign trail that don't come true afterwards. These are all things we can accept. These are all things we understand and can deal with. But they exist, and they exist in numbers that should bring you to the next level and say, what about this next thing? If he could do that, then he can do this. If he can do that, then he can come before the Congress in a non-State of the Union address and tell us, yes, we've finally approved the construction of the Dakota Access Pipeline and the Keystone Pipeline, and we're going to use American steel. And he can say that even as he knows there are ships in port offloading not just non-American steel to build these things, not even Chinese steel, Russian steel. What could possibly be worse for what's happening now? But if he can stand there and do that, could he then also literally just say, I don't know what the hell's in this. I just let whoever I want, whoever I feel I trust, write up executive orders, even ones naming themselves to the National Security Council, and I'll sign it. I may be surprised later, but hey, you know, who knows? I'm not in control here. Sessions recused himself. I said don't. He did. I'm not in control of anything. I don't know what's going on. Who's to blame for all this? I don't know, but I guess we ought to put a pause on everything. I say so. Blumenthal's open to saying so. Ben Whittier says so. Charles Blow says so. You say so. I say so. Call your congresspeople and tell them you say so. Let's do it until they say so. And when they say so, the rest of journalism's fourth estate will say so as well, and maybe we'll be getting somewhere. That's the point. We'll be discussing it all week. Don't you doubt that. In the meantime, I hand you over now to the capable hands, and whose oaths I trust, Wink and Justice, to take over with the after show and bring you all the stuff that we let fall by the wayside in order to bring you this deep philosophizing this morning. Things like what? Well, many dozens of supporters gathered nationwide to march for Trump. Complaining of growing broke, West Palm Beach, Florida business owners wish Trump would stop spending his weekends there. And over 60,000 detained immigrants file a class action suit against a private prison company. And the immigrant... I'm sorry.
From Daily Coos Radio on networksradio.com. You have been listening to the Kagro in the Morning Show
with David Waldman.
I gotta get this one out. 60,000 detained immigrants file a class action lawsuit against the private prison company and ICE for violating anti-slavery laws. You heard the story. Hear them discuss it next on the After Show with Wink and Justice. Keep it right here all day long.